Book 2
Chapter 6
of The Lancashire Witches. This recording is in the public domain. Reading by Andy Minter. The Lancashire Witches, a Romance of Pendle Forest, by William Harrison Ainsworth. Book 2 Pendle Forest.
Chapter 6 The Temptation. Shortly after Richard's departure, a round, rosy-faced personage, whose rusty black cassock, hastily huddled over a dark riding dress, proclaimed him a churchman, entered the hostel. This was the rector of Goldshaw, Parson Holden, a very worthy little man, though rather perhaps too fond of the sports of the field and the bottle. To Roger Nowell and Nicholas Assheton he was of course well known, and was much esteemed by the latter, often riding over to hunt and fish or carouse at Downham. Parson Holden had been sent for by Bess to administer spiritual consolation to poor Richard Baldwin, who she thought stood in need of it, and having respectfully saluted the magistrate, of whom he stood somewhat in awe, and shaken hands cordially with Nicholas, who was delighted to see him, he repaired to the inner room, promising to come back speedily. And he kept his word, for in less than 5 minutes he reappeared with the satisfactory intelligence that the afflicted miller was considerably calmer, and had listened to his counsels with much edification. "Take him a glass of aqua vitae, Bess," he said to the hostess. "He is evidently a cup too low, and will be the better for it. Strong water is a specific I always recommend under such circumstances, Master Sudal, and indeed adopt myself, and I am sure you will approve of it. Harkye, Bess, when you have ministered to poor Baldwin's wants, I must crave your attention to my own, and beg you to fill me a tankard with your oldest ale, and toast me an oatcake to eat with it. I must keep up my spirits, worthy sir," he added to Roger Nowell, "for I have a painful duty to perform. I do not know when I have been more shocked than by the death of poor Mary Baldwin, a fair flower and early nipped." "Nipped, indeed, if all we have heard be correct," rejoined Nowell. "The forest is in a sad state, reverend sir. It would seem as if the enemy of mankind, by means of his abominable agents, were permitted to exercise uncontrolled dominion over it. I must needs say the forlorn condition of the people reflects little credit on those who have them in charge. The powers of darkness could never have prevailed to such an extent if duly resisted." "I lament to hear you say so, good Master Nowell," replied the rector. "I have done my best, I assure you, to keep my small and widely scattered flock together, and to save them from the ravening wolves and cunning foxes that infest the country. And if now and then some sheep have gone astray, or a poor lamb, as in the instance of Mary Baldwin, hath fallen a victim, I am scarcely to blame for the mischance. Rather let me say, sir, that you, as an active and zealous magistrate, should take the matter in hand, and by severe dealing with the offenders arrest the progress of the evil. No defence, spiritual or otherwise, as yet set up against them, has proved effectual." "Justly remarked, reverend sir," observed Potts, looking up from the memorandum book in which he was writing, "and I am sure your advice will not be lost upon Master Richard Nowell. As regards the persons who may be afflicted by witchcraft, hath not our sagacious monarch observed there are 3 kind of folks who may be tempted or troubled: the wicked for their horrible sins, to punish them in like measure; the godly that are sleeping in any great sins or infirmities, and weakness in faith, to waken them up the faster by such an uncouth form; and even some of the best, that their patience may be tried before the world, as Job's was tried. For why may not God use any kind of extraordinary punishment when it pleases him, as well as the ordinary rods of sickness and other adversities?" "Very true, sir," replied Holden, "and we are undergoing this severe trial now. Fortunate are they who profit by it." "Hear what is said further, sir, by the king," pursued Potts. "No man, declares that wise prince, ought to presume so far as to promise any impunity to himself. But further on he gives us courage, for he adds, 'And yet we ought not to be afraid for that of anything that the devil and his wicked instruments can do against us, for we daily fight against him in 100 other ways, and therefore, as a valiant captain affrays no more being at the combat, nor stays from his purpose for the ramishing shot of a cannon, nor the small clack of a pistolet, not being certain what might light upon him. Even so ought we boldly to go forward in fighting against the devil, without any greater terror for these his rarest weapons than the ordinary, whereof we have daily the proof." "His Majesty is quite right," observed Holden, "and I am glad to hear his convincing words so judiciously cited. I myself have no fear of these wicked instruments of Satan." "In what manner, may I ask, have you proved your courage, sir?" inquired Roger Nowell. "Have you preached against them, and denounced their wickedness, menacing them with the thunders of the church?" "I cannot say I have," replied Holden, rather abashed, "but I shall henceforth adopt a very different course. Ah, here comes the ale," he added, taking the foaming tankard from Bess. "This is the best cordial wherewith to sustain one's courage in these trying times." "Some remedy must be found for this intolerable grievance," observed Roger Nowell, after a few moments' reflection. "Till this morning I was not aware of the extent of the evil, but supposed that the two malignant hags, who seem to reign supreme here, confined their operations to blighting corn, maiming cattle, turning milk sour, and even these reports I fancied were greatly exaggerated, and now I find, from what I have seen at Sabden and elsewhere, that they fall very far short of the reality." "It would be difficult to increase the darkness of the picture," said the chirurgeon; "but what remedy will you apply?" "The cautery, sir," replied Potts, "the actual cautery. We will burn out this plague spot. The two old hags and their noxious brood shall be brought to the stake. That will effect a radical cure." "May when it's accomplished, but I fear it will be long ere that happens," replied the chirurgeon, shaking his head doubtfully. "Are you acquainted with Mother Demdike's history, sir?" he added to Potts. "In part," replied the attorney; "but I shall be glad to hear any thing you may have to bring forward on the subject." "The peculiarity in her case," observed Sudall, "and the circumstance distinguishing her dark and dread career from that of all other witches, is that it has been shaped out by destiny. When an infant, a malediction was pronounced upon her head by the unfortunate Abbot Paslew. She is also the offspring of a man reported to have bartered his soul to the enemy of mankind, while her mother was a witch. Both parents perished lamentably about the time of Paslew's execution at Whalley." "It is a pity their miserable infant did not perish with them," observed Holden. "How much crime and misery would have been spared!" "It was otherwise ordained," replied Sudall. "Bereft of her parents in this way, the infant was taken charge of and reared by Dame Croft, the miller's wife of Whalley; but even in those early days she exhibited such a malicious and vindictive disposition, and became so unmanageable, that the good dame was glad to get rid of her, and sent her into the forest, where she found a home at Rough Lee, then occupied by Miles Nutter, the grandfather of the late Richard Nutter." "Aha!" exclaimed Potts. "Was Mother Demdike so early connected with that family? I must make a note of that circumstance." "She remained at Rough Lee for some years," returned Sudall, "and though acquainted of an ill disposition, there was nothing to be alleged against her at the time, though afterwards it was said that some mishaps that befell the neighbours were owing to her agency, and that she was always attended by a familiar in the form of a rat or mole. Whether this were so or not I cannot say, but it is certain that she helped Miles Nutter to get rid of his wife, and procured him a second spouse, in return for which services he bestowed upon her an old ruined tower on his domains." "You mean Malkin Tower?" said Nicholas. "Ay, Malkin Tower," replied the chirurgeon. "There is a legend connected with that structure, which I will relate to you anon, if you desire it. But to proceed. Scarcely had Bess Demdike taken up her abode in this lone tower, than it began to be rumoured that she was a witch, and attended sabbaths on the summit of Pendle Hill and on Rimington Moor. Few would consort with her, and ill luck invariably attended those with whom she quarrelled. Though of hideous and